ॐ सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावतीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। So we've been looking at the caste system, which if you speak about this in a public arena, it can be misconstrued as an abuse of different people, because it has been abused. But it's actually a beautiful design of what, as we're learning, of our own inner temperaments. So once we understand what our nature is, what rajas, tamas we have, and sattva, we put ourselves in the capacity to understand what sort of activity we need to do in order to evolve ourselves, and what activities we might be doing so that we can best serve in our environment to evolve ourselves. So you might identify that you've got some very rajasic traits, in which case get onto what it is that you have to do in order to burn those vasanas up, so you can be quieter, more introvert, and actually focus on something bigger. But if you've got that, you've got to deal with it. Or if you've got tamasic traits, if you're made aware of them by what we've been reading, and if you kind of reflect on it, you can actually think, right, what are the things I've got to avoid which keep me in that plateau of doing nothing? You might think the actual thinking of that is not tamasic, but it's being made aware of. Maybe you can't act on it immediately, but you have a little seed planted in your mind. And if you keep nurturing that, you get the possibility of a little seed, the possibility, when it's nurtured, a little sapling comes out. And from that sapling, a little bush or little plant comes. And it's actually from the acorn that you get the mighty oak. So it's a comprehension of your own traits so that you can work on it. That's the beauty of the caste system. Caste system meaning a Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Sudra. Everybody's got a part to play. It's like a cycle of evolution, and everybody has a part to play with an equality, if you understand it, because nobody's better or worse than one or the other. We're all in a state of evolution. So this is some methods which we can utilize to understand how to grow. Still going on the temperaments, and understanding the temperaments, you also then understand in this part which we're coming to from 45 to 58 onwards, what is your basic nature with respect to your temperaments, how you can nurture your nature, and how you can put them all together so they actually give you a force for moving forward, that understanding. So the topic which we're about to start is topic 7, verses 45 to 58, through karma, bhakti, and jnana, through karma and action, bhakti, devotion, and jnana, knowledge and meditation, one reaches Brahman, that truth, that freedom, which we'll search. Irrespective of what we're doing, we do it all the time, every day. From the minute we get up, we're searching for that truth, self, freedom, Brahman, whatever you want to call it. So we had a question, which is actually about Swadharma. And the whole next few verses are about Swadharma, in fact. So perhaps we can ask this question in a moment when we get onto the verses, and see if there may be something else which comes out of it, or in addition. But if I'm to ask you, who is a Brahmana, who is a Kshatriya, who's a Vaishya, Sudra? Now, we've just been discussing it. So now, what would you say if I'm asking this question? How would you describe it? Or what sense does this caste system make to you? Vidya?
I think it's the varying degrees of gunas that one have, and how we nurture those gunas and perform in society. That then classifies our swadharma, or so much so our nature. So Brahmana qualities would have predominant sattvic guna, a bit of rajasic. Kshatriya would have predominant rajas, a bit of sattvic, and then Vaishyas and Shudras would have predominant tamas, a bit of rajas, but very, very little of sattvic. We could see all the 4 characteristics in one individual depending on what they are doing, but there's always a predominant guna that would then drive them to their vocation, their passion, their journey, whether it's introverted journey or extroverted journey. Their gunas will, their characteristics will drive them.
Anybody else like to add? Tim?
A cat represents the 4 elements. Shudra just sleeps all day long. It's a Kshatriya, it goes out hunting. It's a Vaishya, it offers me a mouse in exchange for love, and it's unattached to anybody. It's very wise, a Brahmana.
But it's still a cat.
But in its next reincarnation,
it could either be a tamasic something or a sattvic something. Often it's said sattva and tamas look alike. Make of it what you want. So in proportion and context. What else? Anyone else? If you're in the cat kingdom, perhaps that's, the cat is the Brahmana in the cat kingdom. or it's sleeping most of the time, its predominance. Shudra. You're a house cat, you don't have to hunt anything. Who knows what? So, in human beings, what else? What else is it important to note about this system?
I mean, it's not set in stone. People could move around and change their qualities and gunas, but that change needs to be brought about by one by oneself, and nobody is born into these classifications, so to speak. It's by their prarabdha vasanas, their cumulative vasanas that they bring, and their actions here and now that would then dictate what kind of a person or characteristic they possess.
Yes, nobody's born into it, so you can decide upon what you want to do. If you have the knowledge, you can decide, right, how am I going to move out of this way of behaving? Or how am I going to do more of this? So it's not necessarily the activity which makes it so, but it's actually what's internally manifesting, which will push that activity forward. So sometimes you may have a sattvic guna, but it may appear to somebody else as though it's not sattvic. They can't see what's going on, the intention behind that bigger picture. It might seem very irrational. In actual fact, you've got a bigger vision going on. Or vice versa. It may seem sattvic, and there's no vision backing it to somewhere higher. But it's not by birthright. Anybody else before we move to?
We receive knowledge of the caste system as a social construct, a social imposition, but the whole of the Gita seems to be, it's a very personal thing. You cannot know what anyone else's character is, their gunas, let alone where they sit in the caste system. So it's a very strange distortion of the Gita that you have this very personal knowledge only of yourself, and yet what we receive is a social construct.
So perhaps what we're receiving is a social construct because originally you would tend to see whatever particular group would be flocking together. You know, if you're more of a thinker, you will find it difficult to be doing more of the very tasks which are more physically orientated. You do it when you need to do it. You don't have any should or shouldn'ts, but you'll be more gravitating to the environments which cultivate your availability to think in a particular manner. So a thinker's not going to, you won't be finding the thinker in the nightclub, unless it's some thinking in that context. But in terms of the higher values, you won't be finding that in truth. You may be finding all sorts of things these days in different places. So it seems distorted because people tend to almost segregate themselves just by, if I'm an engineer, I'll go and I will go towards people of like-mindedness if I want to know something, if I want to feed off that or grow in that field of activity. If I'm a tennis player, I'll gravitate towards the court rather than to the football pitch. So it seems that that construct, which is very much within one's own gunas, will actually manifest outwardly in different groups. But the other way around is not the standard. So because you're in that group doesn't mean to say, by default, doesn't mean to say that you are X or Y. You might just have gone there for that day, or you might be attaching something from an exterior value, a pseudo looking value, but you're not that. And you manage to stay in that environment for a while. And then you move on. But that is the misfortune, that people claim it and abuse it outwardly without being it. When you are a particular trait, and the more you evolve, the less you're going to show that off to people. You don't need that justification of who you are. You don't need it to be said, I am this, you tell me and reassure me. You're reassured in yourself, any stage, because you're getting on with what you have to do to refine yourself. Brahmana or Shudra, doesn't make any difference. And within each group, if it seems like groups, you can maneuver from one to another if you really are clued in of what you're doing. Because you've got to refine those vasanas. That's all your purpose is. These are just names for you to be helped to get on to what you've got to do. Whoever's making the judgment is obviously the one who doesn't understand what it's about. Unfortunately, we're in a predominance of Shudras and Vaishyas, and they have the power of judgment. So you've got to rise above it, not get entangled into their nonsense. Anybody else before we go? "45.
स्वे स्वे कर्मणि अभिरतः संसिद्धिं लभते नरः स्वकर्मणि रतः सिद्धिं यथा विन्दति तत् शृणु.
Isha, if you could read the verse.
Verse 45. Devoted each to his characteristic, man attains complete fulfillment. How one engaged in one's action attains fulfillment. That do listen. The previous topic dealt with the categorization of caste into Brahmana, Kshatri, Vaishya, and Sudra. This topic, through verses 45 to 58, shows how each class of persons finds fulfillment through a particular course of action. Right through the dialogue with Arjuna, Krishna emphasizes the importance of basing life's activity on one's inherent nature. To attain perfection, a seeker must follow the spiritual discipline compatible with his temperament and nature.
Okay. So we understood there's the Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Sudra, and the idea we've got to follow in accordance to our nature to attain that perfection. So whatever it is, really doesn't matter where you are at. You just really got to examine, is this your temperament? Okay, get on to that. Don't bother or worry about what anybody else has got to say. So it's very difficult if you're you can't make somebody who's rajasic sit down and think. You've got to give them some action to get on with it. Sitting and thinking of how they're, and then acting is more or less impossible. They want to really just act first and then think about it. And if it's a Shudra, they just want to be told what to do. They don't want to think about why they've got to do. They just want to be told what to do and get on with it. They serve without thinking. They just want to do that. Do your job, get home, forget about it. They're not interested in why or what. Then the other one where it's like, think about your trade and how it's going to get you that material stance, Vaishya. We can't think about anything else beyond that. Maybe a little bit, if it's going that way towards that Shauri or Phala, may think about something which is socially orientated. A little bit. So you can't shove one into another. You can't make a Brahmana just do things without thinking. It just doesn't work. There'll always be a question of why do I have to do it? How does it fit into the bigger picture? And vice versa. So choose something. The thing it's saying is choose something which hits well with your own structure, your own gunas. Otherwise, you'll be frustrated, feel suppressed. So it's important, as we're coming on to it, to choose something in accordance to one's own swadharma, and not to live somebody else's dream, or your parents' dream, or somebody who thinks you should be doing X or Y. You've got to really think about what your nature is. And that's the way you'll gain that push and feeling of completeness, fulfillment. So if, say, many people are not in that predicament to just choose if they have commitments already, and then suddenly they recognize this is what I'm actually got a tendency or would do well to do, in which case you've got to just really chalk out some time of your day somewhere or whatever it is, just so you nullify or you fulfill that craving. So it doesn't bother you. You fulfill it until you come to an avenue where you can actually do it. And if you can't, at least you're fulfilling that craving. So you're keeping it on the level, you're growing it little bit by little bit. So you're burning up vasanas. In every difficulty, there's some opportunity. Esha.
But isn't our swadharma constantly changing? Because we're changing and we're evolving. So what suited us and what satisfied us, say in our teenage years or as we're getting older, is constantly changing because we're hopefully growing in some way.
Your gunas are changing. Swadharmic nature isn't changing. Your inherent nature. It's like you don't suddenly make an oak tree a silver birch tree. It's always going to be an oak tree. So it's got that nature of, it's got its own characteristics. The fact that they're both trees is a similar nature, but they're different in certain kinds, different in certain parameters. So you don't change you may be changing the way you behave, you may be refining that. You may have more than one innate tendency, one nature, but you don't have loads. And if there's a constant change of different pursuits, you know, maybe there's an explorative aspect to your nature. Maybe there's that. But once you examine it carefully, you've got a few times that you might change. Otherwise, it's that you've not really found out. And you're maybe changing because you're irritated by one, so you go on to the next. You know, you can't change a musician. You may not be able to do it. You may not be in the circumstance to do it any longer. But as soon as you get into that environment where there's instruments available or people playing, you get up and play like fish to in water, swim, duck to water, whatever you call it. So that nature may not be coming up in certain environments, but as soon as you're in that environment, it will come to fruition. And you've actually got to check what your nature is. You've got to reflect on, examine your own tendencies, write a list of what you're tending to do, and assess, am I more inclined to do this? If you ask me to do certain jobs of, I think some of you already know, if you ask me to do certain administrative jobs, I find it extremely difficult. I run away from them. It's not my nature, I know that. But if you ask me to talk on this or do a couple of other things, which I know I'm inclined to do, it's easy. You ask me to do certain administrative, but you have to do them, so you do them. But I don't find it easy. So you know, you've checked the checklist, you know it's not inherent in you. And you know if you want things to work, you have to do it. But you know it won't be necessarily done well. You accept it. Bring on the team who can do their nature and let them get on with it. You do your nature. Let the cause flourish. So you have to check it. Let's read the last part.
In this verse, Krishna underlines Arjuna's obligation to pursue his Kshatriya nature. When a person acts according to his nature, the entire personality supports the action. His body, mind, and intellect cooperate. He finds fulfillment in what he does. The environment or circumstance may not allow a person to act wholly according to his basic nature. Yet he should pursue his nature to the extent he can. Gradually, his part-time turns into his lifetime activity by force of its inherent nature, vasanas.
So you generally go towards that inclination when you know about it. So that's what you're doing. You have to make an effort, otherwise you have to put up with paradharma. Everything takes effort. If you know about something, this is what I ought to be doing, you have to make an effort. 46.
यत प्रवृत्तिं भूतानां येन सर्वमिदं तदं स्वकर्मणा तमप्यर्चय सिद्धिं विन्दति मानवः.
Sam, if you could read the verse.
Verse 46. Worshipping him with one's action from whom beings emerge, by whom all this is pervaded, man attains perfection.
So what he's saying here is that everything merges out of Brahman, is pervaded by Brahman, the self, and all that there is Brahman. So there's a quote by Emerson which says, I have to quote it correctly, every man is a divinity in disguise, a god playing the fool. So everything here is saying, worshipping him with one's actions, from whom beings, by whom all this is pervaded, man attains perfection. So we're all that divinity. So by our worship, by each activity we perform, we worship that divinity, that self within. So that's the idea. There's no demarcation of my or thy. Everything is done in that thinking to get to the self. So if you've chosen your swadharmic activity, you ablate everything that you do to the self. So it's speeded up getting to that truth because you feel very comfortable doing your swadharmic nature. Whereas if you are doing something counter to your own nature, counterproductive to your own nature, it slows everything down. So you've got to deal with that frustration, suppression, before you can actually move to think of something bigger. It's more difficult to keep focused on something higher. So what he's trying to say is just in every action that you do, ablate it to the higher. All the activities are just there. Swadharmic, paradharmic. It's more difficult to understand paradharmic. But in swadharmic, it's more, you've got a clarity to understand. Don't do it just for one's own material needs. It's got a means to an end, the activity, but it's only for something bigger. So you don't get attached or obsessed by your own swadharmic nature, by your own, I'm the artist, or I'm the writer, or I'm the whoever you are, analyst. You're just doing that because it's your nature to get out of it, to get to that essential nature, that self within. Is putting forward, if sooner or later, if you keep nurturing that seed, the sapling, the tree, without being mechanical, but doing it with that purity, keep ablating it, keep present, letting it to something higher, you gain a momentum and awareness. So you can even try it in your activities, like maybe once or twice a day, just remember something bigger. But in many of the religions, they have that you punctuate the day with prayer. It could become mechanical if you don't think about it. But the idea is you're remembering something higher in all activities. That comes first above all. So that universality comes first, that truth. The rest is samsara. So if you're involved in the samsara, it doesn't matter how devoted you are to your activity. It's just transient. It doesn't mean anything. You get attached to that. So it's asking you or giving you an idea of a technique which we call synchronization, where you focus, you perform your activity, but your thoughts are resting on somewhere higher. I am Atma, Brahman. In your activities, you remember that. Constantly ablating it to the higher final goal. It's not mechanical. You don't have a self-interest in things. And every time you do, you remind yourself, I am Atma, Brahman. So the whole of your activities become worship. Let's read it.
I had a quick question, if I may. You know, it would be good to hear your thoughts on this. You know, for example, when you see an artist or a musician or a poet or a dancer or someone who has a passion or has a swadharma for something, and they get really like they like they gain a lot of satisfaction from an activity that they do, like a musician when they're performing, they're completely immersed into an activity, and it's like time, you know, stops for them, and there's a lot of satisfaction. So I wonder if so it just makes me wonder, to me, I mean, to one extent, from one angle, it looks like that is worship, because that person is doing something that is aligned with their nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, if it is not aligned, if it's not for a higher purpose, but then again, what is a higher purpose? If you say that, so if it is not done for like a spiritual growth, but then again, the musician, the act in and of itself can also be a spiritual practice if it's basically not ego based, perhaps, you know, I'm just trying to think, but it is not. I don't know if I'm able to articulate myself, but do you get what I'm trying to say?
If you don't get attached to it and you're not possessive over it, you just do it, you'll drop your vasanas. Eventually, if you drop all your vasanas, there's only something of what we're attributing as self remaining.
Yes.
So you'll be free. That ego won't be there. You don't have that self-interest. You don't have any want to possess what even you've done.
Okay.
You don't have, you might, for a reason to promote the same value so others can benefit or something, but you don't hold on in that. So it's, your thoughts are on something else. Or if it's within the moment at that time, it's in the moment, but you're not holding on to that moment when it's gone, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Thank you. I guess if you're not on a spiritual path, you know, but you're still a musician, and you do that because that gives you a lot of satisfaction, it's really in your nature. And like Beethoven, for example, um, I'm just using that as an example. So you do that as a profession because you're so good at it and you become a world-renowned musician, but you're still not attached to it. But because it's so in your nature that you just do that, but you're still not on a spiritual path. What about that?
It doesn't work like that. If you are spiritual, you see, we're saying here in this verse, oblate everything to the self, Brahman or something, some word, yes? You don't have to have a word, in fact. We're giving it something, so it gives us a focus. Yeah. So in your actions, you might be okay, it's done now. But you don't have any attachment. It's not yours that's done, though you physically, on the physical level, mentally, you projected it. But it doesn't belong to you. You don't have any possessiveness over it. So in that sense, there's a spiritual growth. It's not dependent on your body, mind, or intellect, your perceptions or emotions. You just projected it, but that's it. It's gone. Let go. You're not with that. You're with something else, though you don't know it. So if it's that, we can use many different words. Yeah, different cultures or philosophies or religions will be using all sorts of words. If it's that going on, then you're free. You sit in a temple, church, or mosque, it doesn't make any difference. You might not sit in any of them. It doesn't make any difference. You're free. You're one with everything. That's the idea.
Yeah.
But if you're not, if you're hanging on to something, it doesn't mean to say that you become negligent. You know, you're in the prime of your life. You've got a swadharmic nature. You need certain things to pursue it. You got to do it. But you're not attached to it. That's what the idea is.
I guess my question, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt if you want
There
to say.
was, I think it's Marcus Aurelius, he says, do every act as if it was your last.
Mm.
Whether you're there or not later, it doesn't matter. We're not, you know, also perfect to do that. But that's what he's trying to imply. Yeah, go ahead. You had something.
I was just going to add that I guess if you're, I'm not saying using these terms in a negative way, but I'm just saying like, what I'm trying to say is if you are not a spiritual person, if you're not pursuing a spiritual path, you know, you're quite a worldly person, but at the same time, you have a really high passion for music and you become a really world-renowned musician, but you're still not attached to your music.
That's spiritual.
Yeah.
So you may not say you're not spiritual. It just means that's you're free.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But if you're attached, if you're a worldly person, you see, the equation doesn't necessarily go. If you're very worldly and it means you're dependent on your world for things. If you're spiritual, you're not dependent on the world. To that extent, you're not dependent on your world for things. You may utilize everything in the world, but you're just not dependent on it.
Gotcha, yeah. I guess it's the mental attitude more than anything, yeah.
It is the mental attitude. And we make so many distinctions. I belong to this. It's good to have distinctions to help you move forward. We come to Vedanta class, so you know what you're moving forward with. But if you can't take this in somewhere else and see the commonality of something universal, it actually defeats the object of why you're looking at this or something else which is universal. So it's to cultivate that oneness, that identification. Call it what you like. So you may never look at any scripture or anything like that, and you may be spiritual through and through. It's more tricky in the society or the world we're in, because it's homing us onto growing our egos and our material equipment, which cultivate that self-interest. So we can't just assume if somebody's passionate that they're spiritual. May be very attached to their work, or there may be so many egos playing in it. It may make you world famous. It doesn't mean that you're not. So many famous people are not actually okay with themselves. And you see they come to a certain level and then suddenly a whole load of things collapse like dominoes on them, because they actually haven't dealt with themselves, but suddenly they got fame just like that. without actually working it up. And then others, you know, we go through that stage of life, we go on to the next. It's nothing to do with fame or name. Those are the tragedies of it, unless they can be used for something bigger.
Thank you.
There are many famous spiritual people which may not be spiritual. You have to assess yourself, nobody else. Let's go.
Sure. So I'll read the verse again. Worshipping him with one's action, from whom beings emerge, by whom all this is pervaded, man attains perfection. Verses 46 to 49 cover spiritual discipline of karma, action. Verses 50 to 53 point to jnana, knowledge. Verses 54 and 55 to bhakti, devotion. And 56 to 58 refer to meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Krishna proclaims that beings have emerged from Brahman, reality. Brahman pervades the world, sustains it, just as the dream world emerges from waker's mind. The mind pervades and sustains the dream. However, the dreamer is caught up, enmeshed in the dream world. He knows not the waking state. Likewise, the waker is caught up, enmeshed in the waking world. Spiritual discipline is meant to liberate the waker from bondage to his world. The verse directs you to invoke the supreme reality in your life. Oblate every action to reality. Anchor your thoughts in reality while you perform your obligatory function in the world. Maintain your real identity while you act, just as an actor maintains his personal identity through his performance on stage. The actor thus remains free from the roles he plays, never involved, affected by the happenings on the stage. William Shakespeare philosophizes in his play, As You Like It, all the stage a stage, all the world's stage,
Go ahead.
and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances. Thus, attuning to your real self, Atman, Brahman, through every action. Thus, attaining to a real self, Atman, Brahman, through every action, you shall gain perfection. Realize your supreme self.
So the idea, as you think, so you become. You be that actor on a stage. There's many things going on in your world. You've got to play your part and keep your identity. So keep the focus on that universal identity, not your individuality. So that's what it's trying to get across, which is a build-up, a slow build-up, slowly ablating what you remember to ablate. If you have a streamlined, standardized routine, you make it easier for yourself to pitch up on something higher, because when you forget and go out of sync, you remember something bigger again. So higher, Atman, Brahman. Throughout the day, you forget. Remember something higher. So everywhere has the punctuation of prayer. It's not just in Islam, 5 times a day. It's in more or less all religions. It's just punctuating something higher, but it can't become mechanical. It's reminding you your purpose. So when it becomes mechanical, it's like You forget the reason. You just feel you've got to do it, otherwise in fear. But it's reminding you of something higher. I'm that truth. I'm that freedom. I'm that Atman, Brahman, whatever you want to call it. Not this transient aspect. 47.
We might be able to say that we have found our own Swadharma, but can we say that someone else has found their Swadharma?
In what sense?
Like, did Shakespeare find his Swadharma?
You can't write, was it 38 or whatever plays he wrote, without having a Swadharma for wanting to write and think. You can't sit and physically do it. You know, obviously, that must have been his Swadharma. You just can't, his mind would be running off doing something else.
But I suppose I'm meaning, do you have to be good at your Swadharma?
No. You just have to know it, and gradually you might become good or better at it through effort and time, which is coming in the next verse, 47. Better is Swadharma, one's duty, though without merit, than Paradharma. You might not be good at it in the beginning. But if you know that's innately what you've got to be doing, you've got to do it. You've just got to do it.
So what is the difference between Shakespeare and a jobbing playwright?
So yeah.
What is the difference between Shakespeare and just a forgotten playwright?
I don't, probably no difference if they're both pursuing their Swadharma. Just because one is known and one is not, it doesn't make one better than the other.
Yeah, but we value Shakespeare, like Swamiji Parthasarathy has cited a particular verse from Shakespeare in his commentary here.
Yeah, because everybody will know, so it's useful to understand. Shakespeare put his plays out there and became known on the stage. Another playwright may just write for its sake. You never know what that was. Maybe a few people might know. Maybe some people might benefit. Maybe that's not what his or her role was to do, to have the whole world know it, but just purely fulfill that vasana. So Shakespeare may have had in his nature that value where people would be attracted, and he gained that name, fame, and it became useful to others.
But Shakespeare is offering insights into the self.
Well, we hope. We're making conclusions that that's what he's doing. Doesn't necessarily mean he got the self. We can all read the Bhagavad Gita and offer insights to the self. Doesn't mean to say they're all the self. So he had a talent, a skill where he was successful at it. But the
We're hoping
forgotten,
his Swadharma led to his self-fulfillment.
you got a better chance following Swadharma. If you're following Paradharma, you're collecting more vasanas because you're not actually comfortable, you're not fulfilled in yourself. So you're irritated, you're agitated. So you're collecting more desires, unfulfilled desires. You're not fulfilling your desires. So in Swadharma, the Swadharma, by following it, you're fulfilling your vasanas and desires. So you feel freer, you feel more relaxed. You're not irritated by not doing the wrong things. You're okay about it. So Shakespeare would have evolved himself by pursuing his nature.
But how do we know that he was following his Svadharma? Maybe his Svadharma was to be a chartered accountant, and he spent his life in the paradharma of writing plays. Don't we look at the quality of the output?
So we could see that his plays were orientated to philosophical ideas of higher values, which were more universal than of self-interest. And often his plays are pointing out that. So there's an element of inference that that was his Swadharma. If he was to be a chartered accountant, I'm sure he would have been better off materially, and he wouldn't have stuck with writing plays. So it's not for us to judge, but it seems innately that he probably was a playwright, because he did a good job that years and centuries later, we're still looking at his stuff. That's the whole definition of Swadharma, right within your innate nature. He just didn't write one play. He wrote 37 and lots of other literature. And when you read them, it's like reading philosophy. He couldn't have done it if it wasn't his nature. What would be the argument of that he did it? Why would he have bothered? There's only one reason you might do something when it's not totally swadharmic nature in terms of your inclination, talent, and nature, your want, your desire. And that's when you're totally focused on your pursuit as a sadhak for the higher. You can sweep the street and fulfill your desires, keep your focus. Often some of us, like in the academy, when it comes to karma, we'll do any karma if it allows us to keep focused on the truth. So that's the Swadharma. It's above a Swadharmic nature. It's an understanding. It's just for getting to the self. Swadharma is following your nature in terms of your innate bent, which helps you propel yourself to that direction. It helps you, but it's not the be-all and end-all. But it's a big help and a better one than not. So hence why it's emphasized to do it. Paradharma does the contrary, takes you away. Let's go next week.
Thank you.
Hari Om.